Joining me today on the latest episode of the Gray Area Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports, and also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast for free. I am joined by a soon-to-be NBA staff writer for Sports Illustrated. You can find his work with GQ, New York Times, and everywhere else. You can find him on Twitter at Michael V. Pina. Michael Pina joining me on the program today. Michael, how are you?
I'm doing great, Kevin. Thanks so much for having me, man.
Thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Obviously, some news starting to break as far as the NBA is concerned. Giannis Antetokounmpo, the two-time defending league MVP, has signed will sign his 5-year, $228 million supermax contract. For you, and you recently wrote a piece on Giannis, and it was a very interesting quote at the end of that, talking about how much he loves the city of Milwaukee and what that city has done for him. And more so than anything, how badly he wants to beat LeBron James. With his signing with Milwaukee, what does that signal to you about his mentality and how he wants to continue to show what his career could be in Milwaukee?
I think the first word you have to, or at least that comes to mind to me, is loyalty. And that is not to be disrespectful to any other free agent who leaves the organization that drafted them when they have an opportunity to do so. I think every player should do what's in their own best interest. Giannis is obviously not like all the other players, or a lot of the other players of his caliber, who have reached free agency and then decided to look for greener pastures. So he's obviously confident in the Bucks organization. He's confident in their ownership. He's confident in their front office. He's confident in some of the moves that they've made in the draft in recent years. And obviously he's a fan of Drew Holiday because they gave up so much to get Drew Holiday. So, I mean, for me, it's kind of like, this is not of the norm. This is not what we've seen. Even though a lot of people around the league have been saying for years that Giannis is going to stay, players are not staying. Kevin Durant, LeBron James was the first one who kind of left, and then so on and so forth. So for me, it's kind of like, he started there. They gave a lot to him. They made a bet on him in the draft. They took him in, they developed him, and he's just paying it forward right now and giving back to that city and that organization. And it's really great to see for a small market team like Milwaukee, because it's so difficult to get a player of that caliber in the door. You're not going to sign one in free agency if you're the Milwaukee Bucks pretty much ever. So you better draft him, you better develop him, and you better retain him. And they did that. So congratulations to them.
So Giannis makes his 5-year commitment to stay in Milwaukee. I'm not going to lie, for us down here in Dallas, we're a little disappointed because a lot of folks thought down here that maybe a Luka Giannis combination could potentially happen. Looks like that's not going to happen, at least for right now. As far as Luka Doncic is concerned, a guy who made his ascension to the top of the NBA as far as an all-NBA player was concerned last year and being first-team all-NBA, what have you made about his growth as a player? And is he the next potential face of this league once LeBron James and others step aside with this league?
I mean, what he did last year was borderline unprecedented. He's the total package already offensively. His footwork, his vision, his feel, his touch, his strength, frankly. Like, you just don't see this from someone that age ever, really. And so there are parts of his game that you want to see improve a little bit. He's really a huge fan of the step back three. Took a lot last year. The only player who took more was James Harden. James Harden hits them at a clip that deserves that justifies taking that many. Luka, not so much yet. Luka will. I mean, there's no reason to think that Luka won't eventually get there. And when he does, and he's hitting these threes, he's basically unguardable, and he's a top 5 offense unto himself. It really doesn't even matter who else is on the floor. He makes everybody around him better. I mean, to answer your question, if you had to pick one guy right now to be the face of the league post LeBron, it would easily be Luka. I think every GM in the league would say that.
And how would you assess the health of the league from a star standpoint with the young stars? I'm talking about the Luka Doncic's of the world, the Zion Williamsons of the world, those individuals, and where the game seems to be going, given that next young crop of stars seems to be right behind the LeBrons, the Kawhis, and others, Anthony Davis, and those kinds of guys.
I mean, I think the league is in a tremendous position, frankly. I mean, I would say, there's Jason Tatum, there's Ben Simmons, there's Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, John Morant, Devin Booker. Like, I could go on and on and on. The talent level is so high. It's so promising. All these guys are so polished already. And a lot of them have already like made their mark in the postseason, which is remarkable given their age. So like the sky is the limit for so many different players. Like you mentioned Zion. I mean, he's just a cannonball, unlike anybody that I've ever seen. And getting to watch him is a pleasure. So there's like an entertainment factor too with all these guys. They're not only really fun to watch, but they're really good. So I think the league is in like tremendous position post LeBron, which is maybe not where it was so much post Jordan. It's just kind of a different feel. Not that there weren't great players after Jordan, but like watching Zion Williamson is a little different from watching Tim Duncan, I would say.
Yeah, just a little bit the athleticism portion, just a little bit different with Zion compared to the big fundamental in Tim Duncan. And I'm interested because you're based in Brooklyn, and the Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving experiment is underway for the Brooklyn Nets. Do you think this works with Steve Nash and this crew of individuals who really have remade this culture a little bit with Sean Marks as the GM out there about what they are about? Does this thing ultimately work with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in your mind?
Well, I mean, it depends on how you define work. Like, to me, it's championship. Championship is work. If they don't win a championship, it doesn't work. So, I mean, it's tough to bet against KD. I mean, I don't know if you saw his preseason debut. He just hit some shots that are just like completely unguardable. He's ridiculous. So I'm just looking forward to seeing kind of how it all meshes out. I have questions about their defense, and I think that could be an issue this season, particularly when they get into the playoffs and teams are really able to attack the fact that they don't have, they can make moves and trades and all that, but like they don't really have a lockdown wing defender. We don't know what type of lineups are really going to work for them on that end either. There's a lot of talk about KD at the 5. KD at the 5 is absolutely phenomenal on the offensive end, and you can't guard it. But I think teams will have a field day scoring on them if they go to that lineup. So I'm really interested to see how Steve Nash works his lineups, works his rotation. Talent-wise, they're as talented as any team in the entire NBA, I would say. Kyrie Irving is ridiculous. He's a fireball. Karis LeVert, Spencer Dinwiddie, those guys can get buckets. So the talent really isn't the question. I think defense and kind of forging an identity on that end is going to be the trick here for Steve Nash.
Yeah, there will be no shortage of points scored, but how many points they give up on a nightly basis is probably a big question going into this year. And a team that can score but also defend are the defending champion Los Angeles Lakers. And I don't know about you, but I thought I was most impressed with their offseason, signing Montrezl Harrell and other guys to really kind of fill in some parts of that lineup that seemed to go missing last year. Are the Lakers the overwhelming favorite to win another NBA championship this year?
I think they're the favorite. I don't know if I would use the word overwhelming. I'm a fan of their offseason as well. And what's really fascinating to me is just like when you win a title, a lot of teams will be afraid of making changes to key players that helped you win. And the Lakers were like, no, we need to, Rajon Rondo gave us a lot in the bubble, but we need to upgrade at that position. We need to get Dennis Schroeder, who was one of the best 6 men of the year last season. We need to sign Montrezl Harrell, and we'll let Dwight Howard go. So they made a lot of, you could call them upgrades for sure on the bench, knowing that LeBron James is going to be 36 years old this season, knowing that Anthony Davis has an injury history, and you don't really want to mess around with those two and play them a ton during the regular season. So I think they're the favorite for sure. But I'm still like a pretty big Kawhi Leonard guy, and I like the Clippers. I think they're going to be hungry this year. I think they had an underrated offseason. I really like Luke Kennard. I like Serge Ibaka there, especially when you consider that he won a championship with Kawhi. And there were chemistry issues last season, and some of those pieces are no longer in the locker room. So I like the Clippers as well. I think that those two teams are going to match up and give us the Western Conference Finals that we were a little bit robbed of in the bubble, and I'm looking forward to that series.
And it's interesting you brought up the Clippers because a lot has been made in the short offseason about the chemistry issues that they did have and reports of Kawhi and Paul George getting preferential treatment and those kinds of things. How important is it for the Clippers to overhaul some of that culture and that negativity that surrounded them to really kind of develop the kind of chemistry that a lot of folks thought that they were going to have going into last season?
Sure. I mean, chemistry is critical. It's really important. There's this, I wrote this piece last year about how do you develop chemistry in an NBA where rosters turn over as rapidly as they do now. And, it's something that every team has to deal with, and meshing the right personalities at the end of the day and trying to weigh talent versus emotional fits. And at the end of the day, in the NBA, talent is really the most important thing. And so if you have Kawhi Leonard and you have Paul George, the way I see it, chemistry was important an important factor in their downfall. But they were up 3-1, and then they just kind of stopped hitting shots that they went in. And Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic were hitting absurd shots. So sometimes basketball is a little more simple than I think we as in the media make it out to be, and we try to make we try to figure out and diagnose what went wrong when it's just a simple basketball issue where the bounce of the ball just didn't go their way in a couple of straight games. So that could be a thing as well to kind of take into account when looking at the Clippers heading into the season.
And it's funny you say that because a lot of folks down here in Dallas feel like the Mavericks were the team that could have upset the Clippers in the first round if Kristaps Porzingis doesn't get hurt and deal with his meniscus tear. Where do you see the Mavericks fitting in the Western Conference? Do you think this is a team, granted Kristaps Porzingis comes back healthy, that they could crack the top four of the Western Conference this year, given the talent that they have on this team?
So I think I'm the only person who covers the NBA for a living who isn't super high on the Dallas Mavericks.
Okay.
Heading into this season. I'm on the record earlier saying all those nice things about Luka, and I believe all of them, and he's incredible. I love watching him play. For me, when I look at Dallas, I'm really concerned about Kristaps's health, first and foremost. And when I look at the rest of the Western Conference, only 8 teams get in, and I'm a little nervous, and my trepidation is based in how they look in those first 2-3 weeks, however long it is that Kristaps is unavailable. And then you have to factor in that Kristaps probably is not going to play in back-to-backs for the entire regular season, I would imagine. So how they look on both ends, they add pieces to upgrade the defense, Josh Richardson, James Johnson, some other pieces. I'm a little, I really liked the space that they had last year, and I think that the space and the shooting was why they had the greatest offense of all time. And so I'm interested to see kind of how that trade-off goes, where they don't have a Curry anymore. And even Justin Jackson, who was a pretty good spot-up three-point shooter 2 years ago, maybe not so much last season where he couldn't hit anything. But I'm just really interested to see kind of how, my concern is more steeped, I think, in how much respect I have for other teams in the Western Conference than it is me denigrating Dallas, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Who would those teams be? I can imagine a couple that come to mind, but who would those teams be that you would put in that category?
Sure. So, I mean, I like Phoenix. Honestly, I like the Phoenix Suns. I like Chris Paul going there. The Jay Crowder addition, Mikal Bridges, DeAndre Ayton, Devin Booker, all taking steps forward. I think a lot of people keep sleeping on the Golden State Warriors as well. Obviously, they don't have Clay, and Draymond wasn't very Draymond-esque last season. But I just have a lot of respect for Steph Curry, and I think that Steph looks healthy, and healthy Steph Curry is not someone I really want to bet against quite yet. He has a lot to prove still. I think this is a big season for him individually. So like Golden State, I think Portland will be a lot better. They barely made the playoffs last season. And I'm not giving up yet on the Houston Rockets, which, I'm sure Dallas Mavericks fans really love hearing me say that.
And obviously, because I was going to get to them, but you kind of opened that door. So two teams that I think are really curious this year. We'll start in Houston. Obviously, Steven Silas, a former Dallas Maverick assistant coach, takes over there. They move Russell Westbrook to Washington. They get John Wall in. DeMarcus Cousins, an interesting guy, of course, coming off injury, trying to rehabilitate his career. And then there's James Harden. Mm-hmm. What, in your estimation, what is going on with him as far as his mindset about what he was potentially in being the catalyst for Houston to be a championship team to now to the point where he's just rumored to be like, I got to get out of here now at this point?
Man, your guess is as good as mine with that one. It's so funny because like if James Harden was on a different team and he was looking around trying to win a championship or put himself in a position to contend even, I think he would honestly like look at Houston's roster and be like, that's a really good basketball team. They have a lot of talented pieces, like respectable NBA players who really complement my own game. So I don't know what he's thinking. I mean, I think Rockets fans are hoping that, 2 weeks into the season, if they get off to a good start, like being around Boogie, if Boogie continues to look as good as he did in the preseason, being around John Wall, a respected 5-time All-Star. Christian Wood is a really intriguing player. I want to see what he can do. He hasn't played yet in the preseason. And then just being around guys who he's been around for years, PJ Tucker, Eric Gordon, etc., Gerald Green. Like, it's really hard to, I would imagine, I'm not James Harden, but for me, I'd be like, I don't want to leave these guys. Like, I've been in Houston for so long, and I have a lot of respect for them, and we're playing so well, and maybe I should just, like, see what happens this season. I don't think he should go and be so aggressively trying to get out of town.
Because he has been ultra aggressive, or he was a little passive aggressive in the way that he's handled his business in a lot of ways, especially when you see how he's handling himself on Instagram. And another team that's kind of connected, obviously, with the Rockets because their former basketball operations leader is now in Philadelphia. Okay, so Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers has always fashioned himself more as kind of a player's coach. Daryl Morey is about the numbers and crunching the numbers, not necessarily the best, in terms of people person. How in the world does that work with Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid still there? And can this organization mesh in the way that their talent says they could, what they have on this team?
I mean, I think when we start with Daryl does have a reputation, I think, for, treating players as numbers on a spreadsheet, and not necessarily looking at fit in a way that maybe some other GMs have in decades and generations past. But I mean, since he's gone to Philadelphia, I love the moves that he's made, and they're really sensible for someone who wants to build around Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. You add Curry, who was one of the best from Dallas, one of the best three-point shooters in the world last season. An incredible fit. You had Danny Green, who wins the championship every single year. And
right.
Even though he's not maybe the same guy he was 3-4 years ago, still a knockdown shooter who can be on the floor in a finals game. And so you add shooting around those two. You have Tobias Harris still hanging around. You're not going to be throwing out these lineups that are, Al Horford with Joel Embiid on the floor that are really big and clunky. So they've streamlined the fit with their personnel, which I think is really smart by Daryl. And then, I don't have any problems with Brett Brown or anything. I do think that Doc Rivers is just a more established voice, and they might have needed a new voice and a new kind of leadership in that locker room. And Doc Rivers has cachet, and he has the respect of just about every player he coaches. He's won a title. He wins basically everywhere he goes. So like, I think that the fit there between the head coach and the GM, I think it's fine. It usually is, so long as everyone stays in their lane and does their job. And I just like their roster a lot, especially when you compare it to what they put on the floor last season.
Yeah, I just thought it was a very interesting fit with, of course, all the situation that happened with Doc in Los Angeles, and then a few days later finding himself on the Philadelphia 76ers. That's going to be really interesting and fun to watch this year. And I think for a lot of folks, how do you handicap the West and the East when you start looking at your overall season preview about what these teams are going to look like, with Milwaukee and Miami and teams sitting at the top of the East, and of course the Lakers at the top of the West, it seems like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the West is a total bear. I think there's only I want to say maybe 2, 3 teams, maybe just 2 teams in the West where I'm just like, I can't see that team making the playoffs at all. Like I'm ruling them out right now. In the East, there's a few more of those teams for me. The Knicks are in the East, the Cavs, the Pistons, maybe even the Bulls. Maybe I'll probably throw the Bulls in that conversation. But at the top, I would say that the East and the West are very comparable to me. The East is real strong. You have Milwaukee. I don't think Toronto is going anywhere just yet, and Pascal Siakam has a lot to atone for from his performance in the bubble. Boston will still be really good despite losing Gordon Hayward. You have the Heat went to the championship. I think they'll be interesting this year. I don't know if they'll kind of replicate their success because I think they'll miss Jay Crowder, and I'm interested to see just kind of how Eric Spoelstra deals with Tyler Hero. Does he put him in the starting lineup? Does Myers Leonard play at all? He was their starting center before the bubble, and then he re-signed, so that tells me maybe they're going to go back to that lineup at some point this season. And then you have the Nets with KD and Kyrie, which is as talented a duo in the entire league. So I think the East is it's stacked. I didn't even mention Philly. And then the West, you have the Lakers, who are the prohibitive favorite. You have the Clippers, who I think have every chance and should have every opportunity to knock the Lakers off. And you have teams that are just below that are really nipping at the heels of those two Titans. Like you have the Nuggets, who Nuggets fans are probably listening to this being like, we're better than the Clippers. We beat them last year.
Right.
You have the Nuggets, you have the Jazz, who I really like. You have the Blazers, who kind of rebuilt everything on the fly, and they look really good. Phoenix, Dallas. There's a lot of talented teams in the NBA right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, because, recently reading your piece that you did in GQ on Jaylen Brown, which I thought was fantastic, his social injustice work and what he's continuing to do. And he talked about the ideas of what happened in the bubble in terms of dealing with anxiety and depression and those things in the NBA bubble that a lot of teams and players, dealt with. How has the NBA, in your mind, been able to move away from what they were able to do in the bubble? Can it succeed outside of what they were doing there, given the challenges that they met and dealt with no coronavirus positive tests and those kinds of things? Can they replicate that kind of success in the NBA to where they're mitigating some of those things that they didn't have to experience necessarily in the bubble there?
I think from a health perspective, physical health, catching coronavirus, there will not be 0 cases this season in the NBA as there were 0 cases in the bubble. There is no bubble. So, players are going to be traveling around the country, and, they try to mitigate it with limited travel relative to previous seasons, where you'll see a team that the Dallas Mavericks will be in Denver for, 3 nights in a row, playing them 2 games out of the 3, that sort of thing that you don't normally see during a regular season. So they're trying to make really smart adjustments, but from a physical degree. And then also I think the mental toll of, traveling around this country right now, and not being able to go out at all. There's going to be a limited listing of restaurants that are acceptable for NBA players to be at. And I don't even know what that looks like, but It's obviously not the norm when you're an NBA player. And you can go out, you can go to clubs, you can go to restaurants, you can do whatever when you're on the road, and that's fun. And there's bonding experiences that the players can have also away from the court, which is a huge stress relief. That may not be available to them. So you may see mental health issues pop up like they did in the bubble. But I think more importantly, not more importantly, but more notably, you're going to see players test positive for coronavirus. I think that that's just realistic.
Yeah, it's amazing what they were able to do in the bubble, but now obviously outside the confines of the kind of ecosystem that they built there, it's going to be seeing some different challenges. And I'm interested to see how the NBA handles that. Michael, tell the folks so they can find you in terms of the work that you're doing, some of the work that's coming up for you in 2021, and what we can look for from you coming up during this NBA season.
Sure. So I'm really excited. I'm going to be joining Sports Illustrated, as you said at the top, on January 1st, 2021. In addition to that, I'll be continuing to co-host the Open Floor podcast, which is a Sports Illustrated NBA podcast I've been co-hosting for about a year now. So check out my work at both of those places, my voice and my words. And then I guess follow me on Twitter at Michael V. Pina.
Michael does a great job covering this league. He has some very thought-provoking pieces. The one I was talking about just a minute ago with Jaylen Brown, I thought was absolutely fantastic. Didn't realize he was the son of a professor and the son of a heavyweight boxer who was 7 feet tall. Had no idea about any of that, but that was a tremendous story, and all the social injustice work that he's doing and continue to do as a leader in the NBA. You can find him on Twitter at Michael V. Pina. He is an NBA writer all over the place, and now going to Sports Illustrated. Michael, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it, and look forward to your work and your coverage of the league this season. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin.